Hi, welcome to History from My Garden. I'm your host, Mr. King. Today I'm going to show you how to do an LEQ outline and talk about what the LEQ is. I hope you enjoy. All right, let's step out of the garden to see if we can really do this one some justice. So this is the LEQ, or long essay question, from last year. Actually, no, this is from 2018. Sorry, from 2018. And as you'll see, look at this. Stop the end of the exam. I don't know if you can see that. Oh, I did select. Let me go to draw. Okay, stop the end of the exam, which means that this is the very last thing that we actually have to do when we're coming into this test. We're so close to being prepared. And as you'll see, it'll say answer questions 2, 3, or 4. So you ask yourself, well, where's question 1? Question 1 is the document-based question. That's what question 1 is. So in this case, we've already answered the document-based question, and now we have ourselves 40 minutes to write the long essay question. And in this, we must do certain things. It's going to tell you right up here what we should do. These are things that you already should know. None of these are things that should be brand new to you when you get to the test. So what we're going to do, we're going to respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. You guys already know how to do that. Then we're going to describe the broader historical context relevant to the prompt. We've been practicing with that all year. Then you're going to support an argument in response to the prompt using specific and relevant examples of evidence. You already know what to do with that. Use historical reasoning, i.e., e.g. comparison, causation, continuity, and change over time to frame a structure an argument that addresses the prompt. Well, where are you going to get that? That's going to be in the question itself. And you already know how to do that, and you already know that we're going to use the opposite historical thinking skill, just in case we need to, for a little bit of analysis or complexity. And then we're going to use evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument that addresses the prompt. And that's what I was just talking about there with complexity. So now we have ourselves 3 different questions. We've got number 2, in the period 600 BCE to 600 CE. Well, you're not going to do anything with that one, and yours isn't going to look like that because we don't study that time period in history. So for right now, we're just going to ignore that. All right? And then you have, in the period 1450 to 1750, oceanic voyages resulted in the Columbian Exchange, which transformed the Eastern and Western Hemisphere. Develop an argument that evaluates how the Columbian Exchange affected the people in the Americas at this time period. Now, what we have to do in this one is we have to think to ourselves, which of these historical thinking or reasoning is that actually talking about? Now, ask yourself, pause the video, do whatever you want, but what is that one actually asking us? Develop an argument that evaluates how the Columbian Exchange affected peoples in the Americas in this time period. Well, if you told yourself that one is actually a causation, then you're correct. That one's a cause. What happened to the people? Okay, it's evaluating how it affected the people. So how did the Columbian Exchange, what did the Columbian Exchange cause when it comes to the people? Now, in this case, we're really going to be focused in on affected the peoples of the Americas, right? We're not going to look at how did this affect the people of Europe, although if we want to add some complexity after we've answered or while we're answering this question, maybe we can then actually go in and answer how it affected other peoples in the world. Or we want to look at a different part of the world or a different region and we're doing the exact same thing. So that's that one. Now let's look at the next question. In the period 1900 to 2001, people in states around the world adopted political ideologies such as communism, fascism, nationalism to challenge the existing political and or social order. Develop an argument that evaluates how one or more of these political ideologies challenged the existing political and or social order. Now again, ask yourself, which historical reasoning skill is this actually using? Which one is it? It should be the same one. It should again be cause. what they're going to do is they're going to say, if we're going to have 2 questions on this, those 2 questions or more, in this case 3, they're going to hit the same exact skill. So nobody has an advantage over another. It's either going to be causation, comparison, or continuity or change. Okay, so keep those in your head. Develop an argument that evaluates how one or more of those political ideologies challenged the existing political and or social order, or the Columbian Exchange one. So let's move ahead. Let's look at some advice, okay? I've put this advice on the drive so you can look at it. But here's a few things that we're going to take into consideration. Okay? At the top, it just tells you again what I've kind of told you already. You've got a choice of questions from different periods. Choose one, the one that you know the most about. Causation, comparison, or continuity and change over time. It's not going to be a choice of these different historical thinking skills, but it's going to be a choice from different periods in human history that we have studied. It's not going to be before 1200, okay? So what are the steps that we need to do in order to do that? Okay, step 1, take a breath, okay? At this point in the test, you've already done the multiple choice, then you've moved on and you've done the short answer question, and then you've moved on and theoretically you've already done the document-based question, although you could do those out of order if you wished. But theoretically, this is the last one that you're doing. You're tired at this point. Your brain is probably feeling a little bit like jelly. I recommend doing the document-based question before you do the long essay question because you're going to have to read documents and interact with documents. And in my mind, that is a little bit more of a challenge than just writing the essay. As long as you know what the rubric is asking you to do, and as long as you're following this advice here, you should be okay with doing this one last. But take a breath before you actually go on and do anything, because we know that if you're under pressure, you're going to be a little bit more, some people will say dumber, but you're not going to be as fresh as if you were just in class. Step 1, so that's step 0. Step 1, read the question. And honestly, I can't stress how many times you should read the question. Read it at least 3 times. Some of you guys are going to need to read it more. Do not think that you can read the question 1 time and know what it's asking you to do. Very few of us at this point in the exam would be able to really fully comprehend exactly what it's asking us to do and do it well. Okay, so read it a few times. Make sure that you know what it's asking. So highlight it. You know, you can do that with your pen or pencil. Mark the historical thinking skill in the question. What do we mean by that? Well, write down, is this a cause? Is this a comparison? Is this a continuity and change over time? What is this one asking you to do? Because you must do that. You cannot do something different. And if you don't get that right, it's going to really throw off your points. Okay? Circle the time frame and do that time frame. Make sure you do that time frame. So the Columbian Exchange, that's the time frame that we're talking about. Not really talking about before, although you probably want to do something before to establish context, but you must answer the evidence from that time frame. And likewise in our second one right there, we want to make sure that we're developing it from 1900 to 2001. We don't want to go beyond that. And this one we're looking at 1450 to 1750. So we want to do that time frame. Don't do something different. Okay, then step 2. We're going to write our argumentative thesis. Again, there's no correct way that you have to write a thesis, but this is our little step. X being the counter argument or the best argument that you can come up with against it. However, A is your first part of your argument and B is the second part of your argument that you're going to prove. Therefore, Y. Okay? Why do we do this? Because you guys are historians. Okay? You're, at least at this part, you're historians. This is the closest that we get to come to showing the examiners that we can play with history, that we know what to do with history. We know how historians think and how historians act. And historians they make arguments to prove their point. Historians don't just rattle off names and dates and events that happened in history. We try to establish what did those names and dates mean for humans living at the time and humans that lived after it. What happened as a result of these things? How can we understand the modern world as a result of all these little ripple effects that happened in the water of human history? That's what we want to do. And different historians are going to have different ideas. We've said that we know that for the causes of World War I, it all spells out Maine, right? Militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. But different historians might put different emphasis on those different things. And they might argue that militarism had more to play. Or they might argue that imperialism had more to play. Or we might take it a step further. And as you guys said, human atrocities happening in the 1900s, you guys said, you know what? Nationalism had a great deal to play in that. That's a historical argument. We're going to try to prove that, but as we go on in history, maybe somebody else will come up with other evidence that will support a different theory. So that's what we're going to do. So if you write a thesis that makes an argument, you're good to go. It doesn't matter how you do it, but this is our argumentative thesis. Okay? Number 6, get to know the rubric. You got to know the rubric. Remember, thesis, you get 1 point. Contextualization, starting 30 to 50 years before the prompt. Be specific. Who, what, where, and why. We've also said that sometimes context can be provided if you're looking at a different point, a different part of the world. So for instance, if on that second one, you're looking at the Americas as your main part here, you might provide context for what's happening in Europe. But I also think it's important in this case right here, because this is a causation, to actually start a little bit before and talk about what's happening to establish that line of reasoning. So you can say, here's how it affected the peoples of the Americas. It's hard to show effect if you don't know where we're starting. So that's where you got to start with that context. And then evidence, you're going to get 1 point for 2 different pieces of evidence. You just need to put those 2 pieces out. But then you get a second point for proving how does that evidence support or advance your thesis or your argument, okay? How do those points of pieces of evidence do that? Now again, if you're doing A and B, you might have one really solid piece of evidence for A and one really solid piece of evidence for B, but it doesn't hurt to put more if you have other evidence that shows that. Now the evidence are the who's, the what's, the where's, the how's, the why's, all that stuff that happens in human history that becomes evidence, but they have to be specific details that you provide, okay? Specific details. So for instance, if we're going back here, how did the Columbian Exchange affect peoples of the Americas? Maybe you're like, hey, I want to talk about the horse and how the horse was introduced into the Americas, and that changed the pattern of how different native groups interacted, fought each other, got from point A to point B. Maybe you want to talk about the specific diseases that came through. Maybe you want to talk about the population decline of the Aztec Empire. Any of those things is okay, as long as you provide specific things, and then you got to say why it helps. And then we're going to get points for analysis. Okay, the analysis points down at the bottom. That's where you get 2 other points. And the first point you're going to get for doing the historical thinking skill. You got to do context or comparison or causation, whatever they're asking. Notice in these questions here, it's not completely, it doesn't just say what are the causes or continuities or changes. It doesn't say that stuff. So it's implying that you can read between the lines to figure out what they're asking you to do. And then, of course, you get another point for complexity. And in this case, if you can do the opposite historical thinking skill. So if you're looking at causation or effects, maybe you're going to look at causes. If you're looking at continuities, you're going to look at changes. If you're looking at comparisons, you're going to look at similarities. Okay, so that's what you want to do. Or if you synthesize, meaning you're going to fully address your topic to a different time period, you might apply the whole argument. If you do economic, social, and cultural in this is old, so not period 6, but in the time frame that we're talking about here, the 1900s, you want to look at that whole thing from a different point of view, from a different era. Okay, so that's the advice that we have. This is just your your rubric, and I've simplified it here for you, but again, it's just saying the exact same thing, and this is a checklist, okay? So, let's look at this again. Here we have, we're going to probably take this one right here. Let's take this, okay? We'll take number 4. So we're looking at different political ideologies such as communism, fascism, and nationalism. All right. Now, this is your LEQ outline. This is what I want you to do today. I just want you to do this one. What's the prompt asking you to do? Okay? Here, just write down what historical thinking skill is it? What's it asking you to do? Then, who's it asking you to analyze? What part? In our case, we're looking at different political ideologies all over the world, right? It says people and states, okay? Right there. This prompt is asking us to look at how did it cause or challenge existing what was the causation? These things challenged and they caused other things. They challenged social and political orders to happen. Here's the historical thinking skill right there. Just write what it is, like causation or comparison. 2 strong points that will address that. What are 2 strong points that address it? How did these things challenge the existing political order? Well, we know a big one in the interwar years as we moved into World War II was fascism. Fascism totally challenged that political order. We also know that communism really challenged the political order of the earlier time period and then beyond into the 1950s and 60s, those established political orders, and it really upset things when it came to the Cold War. So those would be 2 really good things to talk about. I might talk about fascism as number 1, as a way that it challenged existing democracies, and I might talk about in number 2 communism and how that challenged both existing monarchies and then fledgling democracies as things move forward. So those would be that. So if those 2 points are true, what does it mean? Okay, both of these things take on totalitarian aspects, right? We know that fascism takes on totalitarian aspects, and I'm just going to write total, you get the idea. And communism did in the end too, in many states. Not every state, but many states, totalitarian aspects. So I'm going to say, therefore, we can see that there was a shift towards more total control and totalitarian political order, or something like that. That becomes our why of our thesis. And then the strongest point against it, well, what's the strongest point against it? If they're saying, how did it challenge political order, then we would want to say, is there any evidence that says it doesn't challenge political order? Okay, well, let's think about this. Were there any places in the world that maintain democracy? Well, let's just start with the biggest one, the United States, right? We know that they're going to be coming onto the scene in the early 1900s, and they will be established as a result of both of those world wars and then beyond, and they maintain their democracy. There is challenges, certainly, to that democracy. As we can see, the Great Depression really puts a strain on it, and then we're going to see how it's challenged even further in the Cold War, maybe by them or their rivalry between communism. Both of these things, though, fascism and communism, will involve the U.S. democracy in some case. So we can put that as our strongest point against. So now as we write our thesis, we're going to start with maybe something like, while it is true that democracies gained more establishment and maintained their democratic ideals in the 20th century, it can be said that fascism and communism proved to be some of the biggest challenges to the political and social order of different states in the world. Therefore, these states took on more totalitarian therefore they took on more totalitarian ideology, or therefore these totalitarian regimes challenged other democracies in the 20th century. And that would wrap up both my X and my A and B to get to my Y. So that's going to be my thesis right there. Okay, now contextualization. Again, here I'm going to have to start with what's happening 30 to 50 years before all these. Well, we know in the 1800s, nationalism is strongly on the rise. We know that communism is being established via Marx. We know that there's existing monarchies. We know that the United States is expanding, although it's not a world power yet. Those are some things that I want to talk about when I get into that, because they're going to give some background and some contextualization as to the rest. Then when we go to the back, what are two pieces of evidence that prove that fascism and communism challenged political orders? I think the biggest one we can talk about here would be World War II, right, with fascism, but also maybe the end of World War I if we want to talk about communism. But I also want to bring in the United States, so I might want to have some pieces of evidence that talk about communism and capitalism vying for power during the Cold War. Any of that is going to be good. And then I just need to say, why do those two pieces of evidence establish it? Can you do more than two pieces? Yes. And I encourage you to do more than just two pieces if you have time. But here we want to do that. The opposite historical thinking skill. Okay, well, I've already established that with X, right? I've said in my argument that democracies kept going. And democracies, while they were challenged, didn't necessarily go away. And we're left with more democracies as we see the fall of communism and fascism go away. Even though those things still exist today, they're much less of a major challenge to the established political and social order. So I want to talk about that in this, okay? And then synthesis, here I can talk about more about if I don't want to do the opposite historical thinking skill, I could apply this theory to maybe the 1800s as I talk about contextualization, but remember I need to do the whole argument. So that's going to be tough because my whole argument deals with fascism and communism. So I think if I were doing this, the easier one would be to do the opposite historical thinking skill. Okay, so that's how you're going to fill out this outline. Once you've filled out the outline with the question that I gave you, then you're going to turn in that outline. You can either send it to me or upload it to assignments. Assignments is still a little bit funky. So if I don't get that up and you don't see that, then just email it to me and we'll share these together. Do not write the full essay yet. You're just putting down your ideas and we're going to compare those ideas to see where we think they can be improved before we commit them to a big essay. Again, in the end, you're not going to have time to do so much brainstorming, but I want to get your brain thinking about what is the structure of your essay before you actually start to jump into it. Okay, that's all we have for today, and I will see you online.